So, I wanted to talk about the new DOJ internal memo issued by Attorney General Pam Bondi, which is essentially a game plan on how to carry out Trump's presidential memorandum, the NSPM 7, that is the national security game plan essentially for the next year. So, the NSPM 7 it lines out what national security issues they're going to be focusing on. Now, Attorney Pam Bondi's memo basically is an instruction list on how to carry it out. So I did a video already on NSPM 7, which I've already uploaded. You can check that out. This is basically part 2. This is about Attorney General Pam Bondi's DOJ memo, which instructs them on how to carry out their campaign of terror. So it basically reads like a blueprint for how a democracy can be hollowed out from within. It uses the language of security and terrorism to target political enemies and silence any form of dissent. Now, on the surface, the Justice Department memo appears to focus on protecting Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, from violence. But a closer look reveals something far more dangerous. A step in an authoritarian project that treats opposition as treason and protest as terrorism. The memo opens by describing a, quote, new era of extreme political violence, lumping together assassination attempts, shootings, vandalism, and street protests, all into one category. It cites rioters chanting arrest ICE or shoot ICE and claims they are, quote, well organized and well funded. The message in all of this is unmistakable. Opposition to ICE is recast not as an expression of your political opinion, not as freedom of speech, but as part of a coordinated, violent conspiracy threatening the nation itself. This is exactly how authoritarian regimes construct their enemy from within narratives. Instead of distinguishing between peaceful protests and isolated criminal acts, the memo collapses it all into a single category of, quote, domestic terrorists and their supporters. Immigration enforcement becomes a sacred institution, and anyone who opposes it is marked as an enemy of the state. Once that leap is made, legitimate dissent disappears. Opponents become threats to be suppressed or uprooted. Now, in a healthy democracy, the law enforcement protects public safety and applies the law neutrally, regardless of politics. This memo pushes the exact opposite agenda. It orders the FBI, ATF, DEA, and U.S. Marshals to direct all necessary officers and agents to defend ICE facilities whenever and wherever they come under attack, explicitly naming Portland and Chicago, cities that are well known to be left-leaning in their activism. The memo goes even further. Agents are instructed to suppress all unlawful rioting and arrest every person suspected of threatening or assaulting a federal law enforcement officer or interfering with federal law enforcement operations. Phrases like suppress and every person suspected evoke occupation, not policing. The national security state is being refocused inward, turning tools that were once reserved for war or terrorism against domestic dissent. And that is literally one of the hallmarks of an authoritarian consolidation of power. Now, maybe the most chilling section of the memo is its direction to federal prosecutors. U.S. attorneys in Oregon and the Northern District of Illinois are told to charge anyone arrested in connection with protests with the highest provable offense under the available law. This is not the language of justice. It's the language of deterrence and intimidation. In practice, that means stacking the harshest possible charges, such as assault on federal officers, conspiracy, civil disorder, and even terrorism related offenses against individuals who, under state or local law, might otherwise face far lesser penalties. The goal here is to make protest participation so risky that people think twice before showing up. Authoritarian systems don't really need mass show trials if they can achieve the same chilling effect with a handful of highly publicized cases that warn, resist, and your life could be destroyed. The memo also targets more than those caught red-handed. It promises to prosecute every person who aids, abets, or conspires through funding, coordination, planning, or any other means. This kind of language threatens organizers, donors, legal aid groups, bail funds, mutual aid workers and networks, even volunteers providing food or transportation. And it seeks to criminalize the support structures that sustain civic resistance. The memo doesn't stop with federal agencies either. It enlists state and local police into a temporary, supposedly, ICE protection task force, offering federal money, training, and equipment. On paper, it looks like coordination. In practice, it creates a patronage network around repression. Local police departments aligning with this federal campaign gain funding, gear, and political favor. Those that refuse risk being labeled as soft on terrorists or excluded from future grants. That's a very popular method right now in the Trump regime of gaining consent. Over time, such incentives spread federal political priorities downward, reshaping policing culture. Officers begin seeing themselves not as neutral public servants, but as soldiers in a shared ideological struggle. This is how creeping authoritarianism embeds itself through rewards, stories, and a sense of righteous unity, not just through overt commands or punishments. Now, on paper, nothing in the memo repeals the First Amendment. There's no explicit statement that criticism of ICE is illegal. Yet the practical message is unmistakable. Attend a protest near an ICE facility, and you risk federal prosecution. Organize, raise funds, or offer legal aid, or share information. Post something online, and you might be investigated as part of a criminal network. Even your local officials who criticize ICE could find their words woven into claims that they incited violence. We see this now. We are already seeing this. Under these conditions, rights exist largely in theory. I mean, those who can't risk arrest, deportation, job loss, or crushing legal fees are more likely to stay home or stay quiet. Organizations will begin to temper their tactics. Donors will hesitate. Journalists and academics may soften their critiques or avoid certain subjects altogether. The public square doesn't vanish overnight. It just grows quieter and narrower and more fearful. Democracy itself depends on noisy, disruptive, persistent dissent, the very kind that this memo aims to deter and end. When an administration stifles protest around its signature policies by wrapping enforcement in the language of terrorism and deploying the machinery of state security, elections alone can no longer safeguard freedom. History offers a grimly consistent warning about where such paths lead. Authoritarian regimes rarely announce themselves. First, they define a permanent internal enemy. Communists, anti-nationals, degenerates, terrorists, enemies of the people, deviants, immigrants. Then they saturate the public with stories of that group's corruption and violence. Then they expand special police powers, courts, and task forces under the banner of security. Over time, the line between enemies and ordinary dissenters blurs or even disappears. Journalists, opposition leaders, unions, students, and minorities can all fall under this new heading of domestic terrorism. Criticism itself becomes criminal. By the time that people realize the change in a lot of these historical cases, institutions have already been cowed and resistance carries an almost unbearable cost. Before that turning point, judges, civil servants, and citizens can still say no. Afterward, it is more difficult, as dissent can bring prison, exile, or even worse. Elections may still occur, but real power lies with a small ruling circle and its security state. The Justice Department memo is not an isolated overreach. It fits into a larger architecture, rooted in NSPM 7 and related orders, that systematically redefines domestic opposition as terrorism and equips the executive branch to crush it. The goal is to make serious resistance functionally impossible, while maintaining the pretense of legality. The lesson from history is clear. The time to recognize and resist these patterns is early, while free speech, protest, and independent institutions still have enough space to push back. Once the machinery of repression becomes normalized and entrenched, dismantling it takes years of struggle and often even human lives.